My family tortured my fiancé for tradition. They left him alone in the woods without his asthma inhaler. But when they forced me to choose between him and them, my dad and brother never expected I'd cut them out forever. I'm 28 years old, work as a freelance graphic designer. And honestly, I need to get all of this out because what happened with my family over the last 2 years basically forced me to choose between the man I love and the people who raised me. And the truth is, I never thought I'd get to this point. I guess I should start from the beginning. When Daniel met my family for the first time about a year and a half ago, because that's when this whole nightmare disguised as family tradition that I didn't even know existed started. Daniel is, he's the most calm and kind person you'll ever meet in your life. He's 30 years old, works as a software engineer, loves to read, he's super patient, and has this quiet sense of humor that makes me laugh even when I'm in a bad mood. We'd been dating for like 6 months when I finally brought him to meet my family, and I was nervous but also excited because I thought, these are my people. They're going to love Daniel as much as I do. How naive I was, seriously. The first sign that something was wrong should have been when we arrived at my parents' house and my dad, who's like 56 years old and has always been this dominant type of person but who I thought was just his personality, opened the door and instead of shaking Daniel's hand or hugging him or whatever normal people do, he said, "I hope you're good at chess because we're going to play some games." And I laughed because I thought he was joking. But no. My dad had literally set up the chessboard on the dining room table and had this weird smile that now, looking back, I should have recognized as a giant red flag. Daniel, being who he is, simply said sure, that he liked chess. And they sat down to play. What I didn't know, what no one had ever told me, is that my family has this horrible tradition of testing the partners of family members, especially the men who join the clan. My dad, my uncle who's like 52, my cousin who's 26, and even my brother who's 25, they all participate in this, and they basically psychologically torture boyfriends or fiancés or whatever to see if they're strong enough to be in the family. It's crazy, I know. But at that moment, I had no idea. So Daniel played chess with my dad, and he lost, which is normal because my dad is really good at chess. But then my dad said, "Another game," and Daniel said okay. And then another, and another, until they'd played 4 games in a row and Daniel was clearly tired but kept being polite and nice about it. I was sitting there thinking this was a bit weird, but I didn't give it much thought. Maybe my dad just wanted to get to know him better or something. Things got stranger in the following weeks. One day, Daniel and I went to visit my parents again, and when we left after dinner, Daniel noticed his tire was flat. But not just flat, someone had literally cut it with something sharp. Daniel was confused. I was angry because I thought some idiot from the neighborhood had done it. But then like 2 weeks later, my cousin, whose name is Tyler and has always been kind of immature, confessed to me while laughing that he'd done it to see how Daniel handled the situation. I was in shock, like, what kind of person does that? I asked my dad about it, and he just laughed and said it was part of seeing what Daniel was made of, that real men can handle small inconveniences. And that's when I started to realize something was really wrong. Because it wasn't just the chess or the tire, it was everything. Every time Daniel came over, my dad, my uncle, my cousin, they all found ways to mess with him or test him somehow. And the worst part, what really started to make me angry, is that they constantly made fun of his asthma. Daniel has mild asthma, nothing super serious, but he does need to use his inhaler from time to time, especially if he's exercising or if there's a lot of pollen in the air or whatever. And my family, these grown men who are supposed to be my family, treated him like he was weak because of it. My dad would make comments like, "I hope you can keep up." Or my uncle would say things like, "In my day, men didn't need inhalers," with this mocking voice that made my blood boil. Daniel never said anything, never complained, just laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. And I admired him for that, but also felt horrible because it was my family making him feel bad. I talked to my mom about it, who's 54 years old and is generally more reasonable than my dad. But she just said that's how men are. That they're playing around, not to take it so seriously. But it wasn't playing around, it was cruel, and it kept getting worse. Then came the fishing and hunting trip. My dad invited Daniel to go with him, my uncle and my cousin to this place in the woods where they go every year, and Daniel, because he's apparently a saint, said yes. I didn't go because, according to my dad, it was a guy thing, which is already problematic. in itself, but whatever. Daniel came back from that trip and he looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. He told me they spent the whole weekend asking him hypothetical questions designed to make him look bad no matter what he answered. Things like, if your wife and your mother are drowning and you can only save one, who do you save? And then no matter what he said, they'd mock him. They also kept up with the asthma jokes, hiding his inhaler by accident, and then laughing when he'd get nervous looking for it. I was furious. I told Daniel he didn't have to keep subjecting himself to this, that we could just stop spending time with my family. But he said he didn't want to cause problems, that he could handle it, that he understood families are complicated. And that made me love him even more, but also made me feel worse, because he shouldn't have to handle it. He should be welcomed and respected. Then Daniel proposed to me. It was beautiful and perfect, and I said yes without hesitation. And I thought that maybe now that we were going to be officially family, my dad and the others would calm down. But no, they got worse. My dad announced there was a final test before the wedding, a camping trip where Daniel would have to prove he could survive and take care of himself. I told him that was ridiculous, that Daniel didn't need to prove anything. But my dad got all serious and said that if Daniel didn't pass the test, he wouldn't give his blessing for the marriage. And I knew it was total manipulation, but also, stupidly, I still wanted my dad's approval. Daniel agreed to go. And I had a bad feeling from the start, but he assured me he'd be fine, that it would just be a weekend. But it didn't go well. Not at all. What happened was that my dad, my uncle, and my cousin took Daniel to the woods, to this remote place like 2 hours from the city, and after setting up camp and spending the first night there, they hid his inhaler. They didn't lose it by accident. They intentionally hid it. And then, on the morning of the second day, they told Daniel that the final test was that he had to stay alone in the woods, without help, without a phone, without anything, just with basic survival stuff, and find his way back to civilization. Daniel thought they were joking, but they weren't. They literally left him there, in the middle of nowhere, and took off. They told him it was to see if he had what it takes to be part of the family, to take care of me if something happened, all this macho and toxic garbage that makes me want to scream just thinking about it. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, is that he didn't have his inhaler because they'd hidden it, and Daniel has asthma. And being alone in the woods with pollen and dust and stress could trigger an attack. Daniel was there for like 6 hours, trying to find his way back, getting more and more anxious because he couldn't find his inhaler and was starting to have trouble breathing, until he finally found a road and a kind driver picked him up and drove him back to the city. When he got to my apartment, he was shaking, not from cold but from anger and fear and exhaustion, and he told me, "I'm done. I can't deal with your family anymore." And I didn't blame him at all, because what they did to him was dangerous and unforgivable. I immediately called my dad, furious, yelling at him on the phone, asking him how he dared put Daniel in danger like that, and he just laughed and said I was overreacting, that Daniel was fine, that it was just a bit of fun, that real men can handle a little pressure. I told him what they did could have killed Daniel if he had a severe asthma attack, and my dad just said that would prove he wasn't strong enough to be in the family anyway. He hung up on me, literally hung up the phone, and I just stood there in shock, thinking, who is this person? Is this the man who raised me? A few days later, my brother came to my apartment, supposedly to see how I was doing, but really it was to defend my dad. He told me I was being too sensitive, that the tests were tradition, that his wife had gone through similar things and now she was part of the family and everything was fine. I asked him what kind of tests his wife had gone through, and he got vague, saying things like, difficult things, uncomfortable questions, stressful situations, but nothing as extreme as abandoning someone in the woods without their medication. I told him that wasn't okay, that it didn't matter if it was tradition, that it was wrong and dangerous and abusive, and he got angry with me, saying I was tearing the family apart, that I was choosing a stranger over my own blood. And that's where I drew the line. That moment when you realize you have to choose between being loyal to people who are treating you badly and protecting yourself and the people you love. I told my brother that Daniel wasn't a stranger, that he was my fiancé, that he'd soon be my husband, and that if my family couldn't respect that and treat him with basic decency, then we'd have to distance ourselves. My brother said I'd regret it, that I'd be alone when my marriage failed, and he left slamming the door. After that, I called a family meeting. Just my mom, my dad, and me, at a neutral restaurant because I didn't want anyone to be able to yell or cause a scene. I told them very clearly that what they'd done to Daniel was unacceptable, that I wasn't going to tolerate more tests or mockery or disrespect, and that if they wanted to be part of my life and my wedding, they needed to genuinely apologize to Daniel and promise they'd change their behavior. My mom looked uncomfortable but nodded, saying she understood and that maybe things had gone too far. My dad, on the other hand, crossed his arms and said he had nothing to apologize for, that he was just protecting his daughter, that if Daniel couldn't handle a little pressure, then he wasn't the right man for me. I told my dad he had a choice. He could apologize and change, or he could not be in my life. Period. I wasn't going to negotiate. I wasn't going to compromise. Those were the options. He sat there in silence for a moment, then got up and left without saying a word. My mom stayed with me, crying a little, saying she'd talk to him, that she'd give him time to process. Like 2 weeks went by and finally my dad agreed to a dinner. Just him, my mom, Daniel, and me, to clear things up. It was the most uncomfortable dinner of my life. My dad barely looked at Daniel. The conversation was forced and tense. And when I finally asked him to apologize, he said something like, "I'm sorry if you felt offended," which, as we all know, isn't a real apology. Daniel, being kinder than I would have been, accepted the non-apology and said he just wanted to move forward. My dad nodded, but you could see he wasn't really sorry. He was just going through the motions. Things were tense, but at least we were talking again, and I started planning the wedding, hoping that with time everything would get better. But then my cousin contacted me, asked me to meet him at a cafe, and when I got there, he unloaded all this guilt on me about how I was tearing the family apart, how my dad was really hurt and felt rejected, how I was being selfish by putting Daniel above my roots. I told him I wasn't putting Daniel above anyone, that I was just demanding basic respect, but he kept going on about how family is forever and boyfriends come and go. All this manipulative garbage that made me want to scream. We had another family dinner a few weeks later, this time with my brother too, and it was more of the same. Forced politeness and empty promises to change. My dad said the words I wanted to hear, but his body language and tone of voice made it clear he still thought he'd done nothing wrong. My brother barely spoke to me, still angry that I'd betrayed the family. Only my mom seemed genuinely trying to fix things. But even she kept defending my dad when we talked privately, saying things like, "You know how he is. That's just his way. He doesn't mean it." The wedding day arrived, and I was nervous but also excited, thinking we could finally have a beautiful day surrounded by people who loved us. But then, the morning of the wedding, I got a text message from my brother saying that he and my dad weren't coming, that they felt conflicted about supporting a marriage when they felt I'd cut them out of my life. I sat there in my wedding dress, makeup done and ready to walk down the aisle, reading this message and feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My mom came, and she cried through the whole ceremony, torn between her husband and her daughter, and I felt horrible for her but also angry because this didn't have to be this way. This was a choice my dad made. The wedding was beautiful anyway. Daniel was perfect and sweet, and his friends and family were incredibly welcoming and kind. But there was this emptiness, where my dad was supposed to be walking me down the aisle, where my brother was supposed to be as part of the wedding party. And it hurt. It hurt a lot. But I also knew I'd made the right choice because a father who really loves you doesn't make you choose like that, doesn't turn your wedding day into a statement about his bruised ego. After the wedding, things got worse somehow. My dad started telling extended family that I'd cut him off, that I wouldn't let him see his daughter, painting himself as the victim in this whole situation. I'd get messages from aunts and uncles asking me why I was being so cruel to my dad, and I had to explain over and over what had really happened. Some believed me, others took my dad's side, and it basically split the family into two camps. My dad also announced he wouldn't come to family events if Daniel was there, which meant I couldn't go to Thanksgiving or Christmas with my family, because, obviously, my husband was coming with me. My mom tried to do separate dinners, where she'd see my dad at one time and me at another, but that just made things more awkward and sad for her. My brother followed my dad's lead, basically stopped talking to me completely, except for occasional text messages accusing me of tearing the family apart. It's been like 6 months since the wedding now, and the situation is still tense. Daniel and I are fine. Really good, actually. Living our life together. But there's this constant weight of the family situation. My mom comes to visit us sometimes, without telling my dad, which makes her feel guilty, but she says she can't stand not seeing her daughter. I talk to her regularly, and she keeps saying, my dad will eventually soften, that he just needs time. But honestly, I don't know if I believe that anymore. Last week, my mom told me my dad had asked how I was doing, if I was happy, and when she said yes, that I was very happy with Daniel. He just grunted and changed the subject. It's like he can't admit he was wrong, that his behavior was what caused all this. So instead, he clings to this narrative that it's me who's excluding him, that it's me who's breaking up the family. And maybe I am, you know? Maybe by setting boundaries and demanding respect, I really broke something in our family dynamic that can't be repaired. But looking at Daniel, seeing how calm and happy he is now that he's not constantly being tested and mocked, knowing we built a life together based on mutual respect and love, I can't regret my decision. Because at the end of the day, I had to choose between allowing abuse disguised as tradition or protecting the man I love. And I chose Daniel. And I'd choose him again every time. My dad and my brother still haven't given any real signs of wanting to change. They still cling to their version of events where they're the victims and I'm the ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. We've set clear rules that if they want to be part of our lives, they need to show genuine respect, give real apologies, and stop with the tests and toxic behavior. Until that happens, contact is limited, and that has to be enough for now. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think about how things used to be. When I was a kid and my dad was my hero, when family gatherings were fun and not battlefields, and it hurts knowing we'll probably never get back to that. But then I look at Daniel sleeping next to me, peaceful and safe, and I remember why I made this decision, and the pain becomes a little more bearable. I don't know what will happen eventually, if my dad will ever really apologize or if we'll just drift further apart over time. What I do know is that I'm not going back. I'm not going to subject Daniel to that treatment again. I'm not going to allow toxicity disguised as love and tradition to dictate how I live my life. And if that makes me the bad guy in my family story, I guess I'll have to live with that.